The gunshot echoed across the Montana territory like a crack of thunder, making Hazel Winters drop the pail of water she'd been carrying from the stream. It wasn't the sound that frightened her. Gunshots were common enough in 1876, but rather what it signified. Her father's land was being seized, and according to the terms he'd agreed to before his death, she was part of the property. The warm June breeze carried the scent of wildflowers as Hazel gathered her skirts and ran toward the small cabin she'd called home for all of her 22 years. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a reminder of her father's final betrayal. James Winters had been a hard man, made harder by the death of Hazel's mother 15 years ago, but she never imagined he would have gambled away not just their homestead but her freedom as well. When she reached the clearing, Hazel saw 3 men on horseback. 2 wore the distinctive badges of the territorial marshal's office. The third, a tall figure whose face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, sat straight-backed on a Palomino stallion. "Miss Winters," called Marshal Dawson, removing his hat in a gesture that might have seemed respectful if he weren't there to deliver her into servitude. "I'm afraid the time has come. Your father's debts must be settled." Hazel lifted her chin, refusing to show fear. "I understand the land is forfeit, Marshal. I'll gather my things and be gone by sundown." The third rider nudged his horse forward, and Hazel got her first clear look at him. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. "Miss Winters," he said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "I'm Everett Blackwood. I've purchased this land from the bank." "Then I'll be on my way, Mr. Blackwood," Hazel replied stiffly. Marshal Dawson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "That's not quite how it works, Miss Winters. According to the document your father signed with the bank 3 years ago, you're included in the property transfer." The world seemed to tilt beneath Hazel's feet. She'd known her situation was precarious. Her father's drinking and gambling had seen to that, but this was beyond imagining. "That's impossible," she whispered. "People can't be bought and sold. Not anymore." "It's not slavery," the second marshal clarified quickly. "The document specifies 7 years of indentured service to whoever purchases the land. Your father took a substantial loan against your labor as well as the property." Hazel's eyes burned with unshed tears as fury and disbelief warred within her. "And you enforce such agreements, Marshal? Is that justice?" Dawson had the grace to look ashamed. "It's legal, Miss Winters. The territory recognizes debt contracts." Everett Blackwood dismounted, moving with the easy grace of a man accustomed to hard work. "May I speak with Miss Winters alone?" The marshals exchanged glances but retreated to the edge of the clearing. "Miss Winters," Blackwood said quietly, "I had no knowledge of this arrangement when I purchased the land. I needed the water rights and grazing area for my ranch to the north." Hazel's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "How fortunate for you to get a servant thrown into the bargain." His expression remained calm in the face of her anger. "I have no need or desire for indentured service. However, there's a complication." "What might that be, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, each word brittle with barely controlled emotion. "If I simply void the contract, the bank has the right to transfer your indenture to another buyer. You'd have no say in where you end up." The implications of his words chilled Hazel to the bone. There were men in the territory who would pay handsomely for a young woman's services, and the nature of those services would have nothing to do with honest labor. "What do you propose, then?" she asked, hating the tremor in her voice. Everett Blackwood studied her for a long moment. "I paid for this land once. I'm prepared to pay for it again at double the price with one condition added to the contract: that you be given the freedom to choose where you go and what you do." Hazel blinked in confusion. "Why would you do that?" Because no person should be sold with the land they were born on, he answered simply. Especially not someone who clearly has the spirit to make their own way. For the first time since the marshals had arrived, Hazel felt a flicker of hope. And if I choose to stay? Then you'd work for fair wages, not as an indentured servant. You'd be free to leave whenever you wished. His eyes met hers directly. But I hope you'll consider staying at least for a while. I could use someone who knows this land, and my housekeeper at the main ranch has been asking for help. Before Hazel could respond, Marshal Dawson approached. Have you reached an understanding? Everett turned to the lawman. I'll be modifying the terms of purchase. I'm willing to pay an additional sum to the bank, provided Miss Winters is released from any obligation and given full rights to determine her own future. Dawson's eyebrows rose. That's mighty generous, Mr. Blackwood. It's not generosity, Everett replied. It's simple decency. As the men discussed the legal details, Hazel stared at the stranger who was offering her freedom. She couldn't fathom why a man would pay twice for land just to release her from a contract that would have benefited him. In her experience, men didn't act without expecting something in return. Yet there was something in Everett Blackwood's steady gaze that made her want to trust him. Perhaps it was foolish, but after 22 years of her father's harsh rule, Hazel found herself willing to take a chance on the kindness of a stranger. 2 hours later, the marshals rode away with documents bearing fresh signatures, and Hazel stood alone with Everett Blackwood in front of the cabin that was no longer her home. What happens now? She asked. That depends on what you want, he replied. You're free to go wherever you choose. Hazel looked around at the land she knew so intimately, the rolling hills, the stream that never ran dry even in the hottest summers, the mountains in the distance that had watched over her entire life. I'd like to stay, she said finally, at least until I decide what comes next. Everett nodded, a smile briefly softening his features. Then welcome to Blackwood Ranch, Miss Winters, as a free woman. As they rode together toward his ranch, Hazel on her father's old mare, bringing the few possessions she valued, neither could have predicted how their lives would intertwine in the months to come, nor how this unusual beginning would blossom into something neither had dared to hope for. The main house of Blackwood Ranch surprised Hazel. She had expected something modest, perhaps slightly larger than her father's cabin. Instead, she found a 2-story structure of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Corrals and outbuildings spread in a practical arrangement, and beyond them, cattle grazed on lush grassland. You've done well for yourself, Mr. Blackwood, she observed as they approached. I've been fortunate, he replied, and persistent. Started with 20 head of cattle and a broken-down cabin 10 years ago. A plump woman with silver-streaked dark hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Everett Blackwood, you're late for supper again. Her stern expression softened when she noticed Hazel. And who might this be? Mrs. Rivera. This is Miss Hazel Winters. She'll be staying with us and helping around the ranch. Miss Winters, this is Elena Rivera, who keeps this place and me from falling into ruin. Mrs. Rivera's warm brown eyes assessed Hazel with kindly curiosity. Welcome, Miss Winters. You look like you could use a hot meal and a soft bed. For the first time that day, Hazel felt tears threatening. The simple kindness after the shock and upheaval was almost too much to bear. Thank you, she managed. Come inside, Mrs. Rivera urged. The men can see to the horses. The interior of the house was as impressive as its exterior, not opulent, but comfortable and well-maintained. The furniture was solid, the floors swept clean, and the walls adorned with a few carefully chosen paintings. It spoke of prosperity earned through hard work rather than inherited wealth. Over a supper of beef stew, freshly baked bread, and apple pie, Hazel learned more about Blackwood Ranch. Everett employed 6 cowhands full-time, with more hired during roundup seasons. Besides Mrs. Rivera, there was only one other woman on the property, Jenny, a young widow who helped with laundry and came in from the nearby town 3 times a week. "You'll have the room at the top of the stairs," Mrs. Rivera told her. "It has a nice view of the mountains." Later, alone in that room with its simple but comfortable furnishings, Hazel sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to weep. Not just for the day's events, but for years of enduring her father's bitter temper, for the mother she'd lost too young, and for the future she'd never dared to imagine beyond the boundaries of their small homestead. When her tears were spent, she stood and moved to the window. The moon cast silver light across the ranch, and in the distance, the mountains stood as they always had, silent witnesses to human struggles. For the first time in her life, Hazel felt truly unbound. Whatever came next would be her choice alone. Dawn found Hazel already dressed and eager to prove her worth. If she was to stay at Blackwood Ranch, even temporarily, she would earn her keep. She made her way downstairs, following the aroma of coffee to the kitchen where Mrs. Rivera was already preparing breakfast. "You're an early riser," the housekeeper observed. "Good. There's always plenty to do before the day gets hot." "I'm used to work," Hazel replied, rolling up her sleeves. "What can I help with?" By the time Everett and the ranch hands came in for breakfast, Hazel had helped prepare a hearty meal of flapjacks, bacon, and eggs. She'd also learned that Elena Rivera had come to Montana 15 years ago after losing her husband to a mining accident in Colorado. Everett seemed surprised to see Hazel serving alongside Mrs. Rivera, but he offered a nod of approval. "I see you found your place already, Miss Winters." "Just helping where I can, Mr. Blackwood." The ranch hands, a diverse group ranging from grizzled veterans to fresh-faced boys barely out of their teens, regarded her with polite curiosity. Everett introduced them: Miguel, Mrs. Rivera's son and the ranch foreman, brothers Caleb and Joshua Peterson, an enormous Norwegian called Bjorn, a taciturn Cherokee man who went by the name Walker, and young Tommy, who couldn't be more than 16. "Miss Winters knows the eastern section of our land better than any of us," Everett explained. "Her family homesteaded there for years." "Been wondering about that stream on the new property," Miguel said. "Seems like it might be good for expanding the south pasture irrigation." "It runs strong year-round," Hazel confirmed. "Even in the drought 3 summers back, it never failed." The conversation turned to ranch matters, and Hazel found herself drawn into discussions about water management and grazing rotation. Her father might have been a poor businessman and a worse parent, but he taught her about the land and its rhythms. After breakfast, Everett asked Hazel to accompany him on a ride to her former homestead. "I'd appreciate your insights on how best to use that land," he explained. They rode out as the morning mist was burning off the grasslands. Hazel led the way, pointing out features of the landscape that might not be obvious to someone unfamiliar with the territory: a patch of quicksand near the stream's bend, a hillside prone to slides after heavy rain, the best spots for wild berries come late summer. When they reached her former home, Hazel felt a strange detachment. The cabin seemed smaller somehow, its weathered logs and sagging porch less substantial than in her memory. "What will you do with it?" she asked as they dismounted. "That depends," Everett replied, tying his horse to a post. "Is there anything worth salvaging?" Hazel shook her head. "Not much. The roof leaks in 3 places, and the floors rotted through near the hearth. Then we'll likely take it down, use what lumber we can elsewhere." He studied her expression. "Unless you'd prefer it remained standing?" "No," she said firmly. "Better to use it for something new than let it decay." They walked the property together, with Hazel indicating the boundaries her father had established and the areas where the soil was richest. As they worked, she found herself watching Everett when he wasn't looking her way. There was an intensity to him, a focus that suggested he never did anything halfway. "Your father worked this land alone?" he asked as they paused near the vegetable garden Hazel had tended. "Mostly. He hired help at planting and harvest when he could afford it." She hesitated, then added, "After my mother died, he changed. Drank more, worked less. I did what I could. But you kept this place going," Everett observed, gesturing to the carefully maintained garden beds. "This wasn't his work." "No," she admitted. "This was mine." Something shifted in his expression, respect, perhaps, or understanding. "You know more than just where berries grow, don't you, Miss Winters? I know how to work, Mr. Blackwood. How to coax food from stubborn soil and stretch supplies through a hard winter." She met his gaze directly. "I know how to survive." "I believe you do," he said quietly. "And I'd like you to teach some of that knowledge to my people. We raise cattle well enough, but our attempts at growing food for ourselves have been less successful." For the next several hours, they walked the property line, discussing potential improvements and uses for the various sections. By the time they turned back toward Blackwood Ranch, Hazel felt a new sense of purpose. Perhaps this arrangement could benefit them both. As weeks passed, Hazel settled into life at Blackwood Ranch. She divided her time between helping Mrs. Rivera with household duties and establishing a substantial kitchen garden. The ranch hands were initially skeptical of her agricultural advice but became converts when her methods produced faster germination and stronger seedlings. Everett was often away, dealing with business in town or checking on distant sections of his growing ranch. But when present, he sought Hazel's company with increasing frequency. They would ride together in the evenings, discussing plans for the land or simply enjoying the spectacular Montana sunsets. "Why didn't you marry?" he asked one evening as they sat on a hillside overlooking the valley. "Forgive my bluntness, but a capable woman like yourself must have had suitors." Hazel smiled wryly. "Few men were willing to take on James Winters as a father-in-law. Those who were, I couldn't abide." "Their loss?" Everett remarked, his eyes on the distant mountains. "What about you?" Hazel countered. "A successful rancher should have his pick of eligible ladies." Something darkened in his expression. "I was engaged once, 8 years ago." When he didn't continue, Hazel asked gently, "What happened?" "Typhoid. Swept through the mining camp where her family lived." He picked up a small stone, turning it over in his fingers. "By the time I reached them, Caroline and her parents were already gone." "I'm sorry," Hazel said softly. "Losing someone you love leaves a hole that never quite fills." "You speak from experience." "My mother," she confirmed. "She taught me everything worth knowing: how to read and write, how to sew and cook, how to find beauty even in hard times." Hazel looked down at her calloused hands. "After she died, my father saw only another pair of hands to work his land, not a daughter to protect." They sat in companionable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and purple. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared loss and resilience. The following day brought unexpected news. Everett returned from town with a letter for Hazel, the first correspondence she'd ever received. It was from a cousin of her mother's in San Francisco, responding to an inquiry Everett had made on Hazel's behalf. "You wrote to my mother's family?" Hazel asked, stunned. "How did you even know about them?" "You mentioned your mother came from California," Everett explained. "I have business contacts in San Francisco who helped locate her relatives." The letter was warm and welcoming. Aunt Martha, her mother's cousin, expressed delight at discovering Elizabeth's daughter and extended an invitation for Hazel to visit or even relocate to San Francisco if she wished. I don't know what to say," Hazel stammered, clutching the letter. You don't need to say anything, Everett replied. I wanted you to have options, as I promised. Real freedom means knowing all your choices. That night, Hazel lay awake, the letter on her bedside table. San Francisco, a city she'd only heard about in stories. A place of opportunity, especially for a woman willing to work hard. Part of her was tempted by the prospect of a fresh start among family who might welcome her. Yet, as she imagined leaving Montana, leaving Blackwood Ranch, she felt an unexpected reluctance. In just a few weeks, this place had begun to feel like home in a way her father's cabin never had. And Everett. Hazel turned over, burying her face in her pillow. It was foolish to develop feelings for Everett Blackwood. He was her employer, not a potential suitor. The fact that he treated her with respect and valued her opinions didn't mean his interest was anything but professional. Still, she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest when he smiled at her, or the way his hand on her arm to steady her crossing a stream had lingered longer than strictly necessary. July brought scorching heat and the threat of wildfire. The ranch hands worked tirelessly to prepare fire breaks around the property, while Hazel and Mrs. Rivera ensured everyone stayed hydrated and fed. During this busy time, Hazel had little opportunity for private conversations with Everett, but she often felt his eyes following her as she moved about the ranch. One evening, as Hazel was returning from checking on her garden, she overheard Miguel and Everett in conversation behind the barn. Not saying it's wrong, boss. Miguel was saying, just complicated. People talk. Let them, came Everett's reply. I've never much cared for gossip. The girl deserves better than to be the subject of rumors. Miss Winters deserves respect, which she has from everyone on this ranch. Everett's voice had an edge to it. If anyone in town suggests otherwise, they'll answer to me. That's exactly what I mean, Miguel sighed. When a man defends a woman's honor that fiercely, folks draw conclusions. Hazel slipped away before she could hear Everett's response, her cheeks burning. She hadn't considered how her presence at the ranch might appear to outsiders. An unmarried woman living under the same roof as a bachelor rancher, even with Mrs. Rivera as chaperone, was bound to raise eyebrows. The next morning at breakfast, Hazel announced her intention to visit her aunt in San Francisco. I've been imposing on your hospitality for too long, she explained, avoiding Everett's gaze. It's time I made my own way. A heavy silence fell over the table. Mrs. Rivera was the first to respond. Nonsense, child. You've worked harder than 2 hired girls combined. You're no imposition. Nevertheless, Hazel insisted, I should explore other opportunities. My aunt's invitation is generous, and I may not have another chance to see California. When she finally looked at Everett, his expression was carefully neutral. If that's what you want, Miss Winters, I'll arrange for safe passage. The stage runs to Virginia City, where you can connect to the railroad. Thank you, she said, feeling a strange hollowness in her chest at his ready acceptance of her departure. After breakfast, as Hazel was hanging laundry, Everett approached. Is this truly what you want? He asked without preamble. Hazel focused on pinning a sheet to the line. It seems the sensible course. That's not what I asked. She turned to face him, determined to maintain her composure. What I want isn't always practical, Mr. Blackwood. I've learned that lesson well. Hazel. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart skip. Tell me why you're really leaving. I overheard you and Miguel last night, she admitted. I don't wish to be the cause of gossip that might damage your reputation or the ranch's standing. Everett's jaw tightened. So you'd uproot your life because of what some small-minded people might say? No, Hazel countered. I'm considering my options, as you encouraged me to do. Isn't that why you contacted my aunt? To give me a choice. Yes, but he broke off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I didn't think you'd choose to leave so soon." There was something in his voice, a vulnerability she hadn't heard before, that made Hazel pause. "Would it matter to you if I stayed?" Everett stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. "More than I have any right to admit." Before he could say more, Walker rode into the yard at a gallop, his usually impassive face tight with urgency. "Fire!" he called. Coming fast from the south ridge. All personal matters were instantly forgotten as the ranch mobilized. Wildfires were a rancher's nightmare, capable of destroying grazing land, killing livestock, and threatening buildings in a matter of hours. Everett issued rapid orders, sending men to different sections of the property. Hazel ran to help Mrs. Rivera gather essential supplies in case evacuation became necessary, but her mind was spinning with Everett's unfinished confession. "More than I have any right to admit." What had he been about to say? By mid-afternoon, the fire had reached the southern boundary of Blackwood Ranch. Hazel could see the smoke billowing above the tree line as she filled canteens for the men fighting the blaze. When Caleb rode in for fresh supplies, his face blackened with soot, she demanded news. "It's bad," he admitted. "Wind's pushing it straight toward the east pasture. Boss sent the hands to move the cattle north, but he's still out there with Miguel and Walker, trying to widen the firebreak." "Where exactly?" Hazel asked, a knot forming in her stomach. Caleb pointed toward a ridge visible from the ranch house. "Along that line there, they're setting backfires to burn up the fuel before the main fire arrives." Hazel knew that ridge. It was part of her father's former property, an area prone to sudden wind shifts. Without thinking twice, she saddled a horse and loaded it with water and wet blankets. Mrs. Rivera tried to stop her. "You can't go out there, girl. It's too dangerous." "They don't know that land like I do," Hazel insisted. "There's a ravine that channels wind like a funnel. If they're setting backfires and the wind shifts." She rode hard toward the ridge, the smell of smoke growing stronger with every passing minute. As she crested a small hill, she saw the full extent of the fire, a wall of flame advancing through dry brush, with a smaller, controlled line of fire ahead of it. Hazel spotted Everett, Miguel, and Walker working along the ridgeline, using torches to set strategic fires that would consume the fuel in the main fire's path. They hadn't yet reached the ravine she was worried about, but they were heading in that direction. She urged her horse forward, calling out as soon as she was within earshot. "Everett, stop! The wind will shift." He turned at the sound of her voice, his expression changing from surprise to alarm. "Hazel, get back to the ranch. Listen to me," she shouted, dismounting and running toward him. "There's a ravine ahead." That her warning came too late. A sudden gust roared through the hidden ravine, exactly as she'd feared. In an instant, the controlled backfire exploded into a roaring blaze, cutting off their retreat path. "Run!" Everett shouted, grabbing Hazel's arm. They sprinted away from the advancing flames, but the fire was moving too quickly. Smoke billowed around them, making it hard to see and harder to breathe. Hazel stumbled, coughing violently, and Everett swept her into his arms without breaking stride. "The stream," she gasped, pointing west. "If we can reach it." Everett changed direction, following her guidance. Miguel and Walker were somewhere ahead of them, barely visible through the thickening smoke. The heat was becoming unbearable, scorching Hazel's lungs with each breath. Just when she thought they couldn't go any farther, they stumbled down a short embankment and into the blessed relief of the stream. The water was only knee-deep, but it offered protection from the flames now racing along both banks. Everett lowered Hazel into the water, keeping one arm around her waist to steady her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, still coughing. "Just smoke." "Miguel and Walker." "Here, boss," came Miguel's voice from upstream. He and Walker were crouched in the water, using wet bandanas to cover their faces. For nearly an hour, they huddled in the stream as the fire raged around them. Hazel pressed against Everett's side, drawing strength from his solid presence. Despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, she felt a strange clarity. If these were to be her final moments, she was glad to spend them with this man. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have reached you sooner." Everett's arm tightened around her. "You risked your life to warn us. Don't apologize for that." "Still thinking about leaving for California?" There was the faintest hint of teasing in his smoke-roughened voice. Despite everything, Hazel felt a smile tug at her lips. "Depends on whether we survive this." "We'll survive," he promised. "And then we need to finish our conversation." Eventually, the roar of the fire diminished. The main blaze had moved on, leaving behind smoldering earth and blackened trees. When it seemed safe, they waded out of the stream and made their way carefully back toward the ranch, leading Hazel's horse, which had fortunately bolted to safety near the water. They emerged from the burned area to find Caleb, Joshua, and several other hands searching for them, their relief evident when they spotted the bedraggled group. "Thank God," Caleb breathed. "We thought you might be trapped." "Nearly were," Miguel confirmed. "If Miss Winters hadn't come looking for us." Back at the ranch, the fire's path had spared the buildings, though it had claimed a significant portion of the southern grazing land. The east pasture, the former Winters property, had been completely burned over. Mrs. Rivera fussed over them, insisting on treating minor burns and scrapes before allowing them to clean up. As Hazel soaked in a bath, washing away soot and smoke, she reflected on the day's events. She had nearly lost Everett before discovering what might exist between them. The thought made her shiver despite the warm water. Later that evening, after the chaos had settled and reports confirmed no lives had been lost to the fire, Everett sought Hazel out on the porch where she sat watching the last glow of sunset. "May I join you?" he asked. She nodded, making room on the bench. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, the evening air still carrying the distant scent of smoke. "I believe we had a conversation to finish," Everett finally said, his voice gentle. Hazel turned to look at him, taking in the strong lines of his profile, the small burns on his forearm where sparks had found their way past his rolled-up sleeve. "Yes," she agreed. "You were about to tell me why it would matter if I stayed." Everett met her gaze steadily. "Because in the short time you've been here, you've become essential to Blackwood Ranch, to its future." He paused, then added more softly, "To me." Hazel's heart quickened. How essential? Instead of answering with words, Everett reached out to take her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "When I first saw you standing defiantly in front of your father's cabin, I admired your courage. As I've come to know you, that admiration has grown into something deeper." His thumb traced a gentle pattern on her palm. "I find myself thinking of you when we're apart, looking for you when I return home, valuing your opinion above all others." "That sounds like more than an employer's regard for a valued employee," Hazel observed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Much more," he agreed. "I know it's too soon, that you've barely had time to adjust to your new circumstances. I'm not asking for promises, Hazel, just asking you to consider staying not just at the ranch but in Montana, with me." The vulnerability in his expression moved her deeply. This was a man who had built his life through determination and hard work, who commanded respect from everyone who knew him. Yet here he sat, his heart open to her, asking for nothing more than a chance. "I was never really planning to leave," she admitted. "I only thought it might be best for you if I did." Relief washed over his features. "Then stay. Not because it's best for me or for the ranch, but because it's what you want." "It is what I want," she said simply. I want to see my garden flourish. I want to help this ranch grow. I want. She hesitated, then finished boldly. I want to see where this path between us leads. Everett's smile transformed his face, erasing the worry lines that had formed during the fire. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward until his lips met hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened into something more urgent. When they finally parted, both breathless, Everett rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since you explained how to improve our irrigation system. Hazel laughed softly. That's what captivates you? My knowledge of water management. Among other qualities, he murmured, his eyes warm with promise as he captured her lips again. As summer turned to autumn, Hazel's role at Blackwood Ranch evolved. No longer simply an employee, she became Everett's partner in both the business and the provisional running of the household. They made no formal announcement of their changing relationship, but no one on the ranch seemed surprised by the development. About time, Mrs. Rivera remarked one evening when she found them sitting close together on the porch, hands entwined. I was beginning to think you were both blind. The fire had done significant damage to the grazing lands, but autumn rains brought new growth to the scorched earth. Hazel expanded her garden and began teaching Mrs. Rivera and some of the ranch hands about seed saving and crop rotation. Under her guidance, the ranch began producing enough vegetables to sell the surplus in town, adding a new source of income. Everett, meanwhile, courted her with a combination of respect and passion that made Hazel feel both cherished and desired. Their evenings often ended with lingering kisses and reluctant goodnights, both aware of the propriety they still maintained under Mrs. Rivera's watchful eye. In October, Everett traveled to Helena on business, leaving Hazel in charge of the ranch's daily operations. It was a mark of his trust that raised her standing even further in the eyes of the hands. When he returned after a week away, his first act was to seek her out in the garden where she was harvesting the last of the season's tomatoes. I missed you, he said, taking the basket from her hands and setting it aside before pulling her into an embrace. Enough to make up for leaving me to deal with Bjorn's complaints about the new saddles? She teased, though she melted against him willingly enough. More than enough, he promised, his lips finding hers in a kiss that left her breathless. That evening after supper, as the household settled into their usual routines, Everett asked Hazel to join him for a ride. It's getting dark, she pointed out. Not too dark for what I have in mind, he replied with a smile that quickened her pulse. They rode to a hillside overlooking the ranch, where Everett had arranged a blanket and a small lantern. The October air was crisp, and the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. What's the occasion? Hazel asked as they dismounted. Everett seemed uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with his hat before setting it aside. I wanted someplace special for this conversation. That sounds ominous, she remarked, only half joking. He took her hands in his. Hazel Winters, when I bought your father's land, I never imagined I was also finding the woman who would change my life. Her heart began to race as she realized where this might be heading. These past months have shown me what I was missing, he continued. Not just a capable partner for the ranch, though you're certainly that, but a woman whose strength and kindness match my own ambitions and hopes. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. I went to Helena to find this. Inside the box was a ring, a modest diamond flanked by 2 small sapphires, set in gold. The jeweler said the blue stones matched the Montana sky, Everett said softly. I thought that appropriate for a woman who embodies the spirit of this land. Tears welled in Hazel's eyes as he dropped to one knee before her. Hazel Winters, I love you. I want to build a life with you, not as my employee or even as my partner, but as my wife. Will you marry me? Yes, she whispered, and then louder. Yes, Everett Blackwood, I will marry you. His face lit with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms. Their kiss was a promise, a sealing of the bond that had grown between them since that first meeting when he'd paid twice for land to ensure her freedom. From property to partnership to marriage, Hazel mused when they finally broke apart. Quite a journey in just a few months. The best journey of my life, Everett replied, his eyes shining in the lantern light. And it's only beginning. They were married on the first day of November, with the ranch hands and Mrs. Rivera in attendance, along with the few friends Everett had made during his years in Montana. Hazel wore a new dress of deep blue silk, Everett's wedding gift, with her mother's lace shawl draped around her shoulders. Judge Porter, who had ridden out from town for the occasion, performed a simple ceremony on the ranch house porch. When he pronounced them husband and wife, the ranch hands let out whoops of approval that startled birds from nearby trees. Mrs. Blackwood, Everett murmured against Hazel's ear as they shared their first dance in the yard cleared for the celebration. "How does it sound?" "Like freedom," she replied, surprising him. At his questioning look, she explained, "Not freedom from something, but freedom to be exactly who I am, with the man I choose." The party continued until late, with music provided by Walker's surprisingly skillful fiddle playing and Bjorn's booming baritone leading everyone in song. When the newlyweds finally slipped away to the main house, the hands tactfully relocating to the bunkhouse for the night, Hazel felt a mixture of nervous anticipation and absolute certainty. In the privacy of what was now their bedroom, Everett was tender and patient, his hands and lips guiding Hazel through the discovery of physical love with the same care he'd shown in every aspect of their relationship. Later, as she lay in his arms watching moonlight pattern the quilt covering them, Hazel felt a profound sense of homecoming. "What are you thinking?" Everett asked, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her bare shoulder. "That some good can come even from the worst situations," she replied. "If my father hadn't made that terrible bargain, we might never have met." "I like to think we would have found each other somehow," he said. "Some connections are meant to be." As winter settled over Montana, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a pristine wonderland, Blackwood Ranch adjusted to having a mistress as well as a master. Hazel brought changes, some subtle, others more significant, that improved life for everyone on the property. She instituted weekly reading sessions in the evening, teaching two of the younger hands who had never learned their letters. She reorganized the storage cellars, ensuring supplies would last through the harsh winter months. And she brought laughter to a household that had functioned efficiently but solemnly under Everett's bachelor management. For his part, Everett delighted in sharing every aspect of his life with Hazel. He consulted her on business decisions, taught her about cattle breeding, and spent snowy evenings planning spring expansion with her input guiding many choices. Their partnership extended seamlessly from hearth to ledger book, each respecting the other's strengths. Their physical relationship deepened as well, initial hesitancy giving way to passionate discovery. Hazel found that Everett's controlled exterior hid a deeply sensual nature that responded powerfully to her touch. For a woman who had spent years suppressing her own desires under her father's critical eye, the freedom to express and receive love was intoxicating. Christmas brought a brief thaw and an unexpected visit from Aunt Martha, who had decided that if Hazel wouldn't come to San Francisco, she would bring San Francisco to Hazel. The elderly woman arrived bearing gifts, stories of Hazel's mother as a girl, and an unquenchable curiosity about ranch life. "Elizabeth would be so proud of you," Martha told Hazel as they prepared Christmas dinner together. "She always said you had a streak of wildness that would serve you well if you found the right path for it." "I wish she could have known Everett," Hazel replied, blinking back tears. "She would have liked him." "Oh, I think she knows," Martha said with a gentle smile, "and approves heartily from what I've seen." The new year of 1877 arrived with a blizzard that kept everyone confined to the main house for 3 days. When the storm finally cleared, they emerged to find snowdrifts taller than a man in some places. The hands worked tirelessly to reach the cattle herds, which had instinctively gathered in protected valleys. As January progressed, Hazel began to suspect a new development, one that both thrilled and terrified her. When she missed her monthly course for the second time, she confided in Mrs. Rivera, who confirmed what Hazel already knew in her heart. She told Everett on a clear, cold evening as they sat before the fire in their bedroom. His response was everything she could have hoped for, joy mingled with protective concern. His hand spanning her still flat stomach with reverent wonder. "A child," he breathed. "Our child. Due in late summer, Mrs. Rivera thinks?" Hazel said, covering his hand with her own. "Are you happy?" "Beyond words," he assured her, gathering her close. "You've given me more than I ever dreamed possible." Hazel Blackwood. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the ranch with explosive growth. The burned areas from the previous summer's fire now sprouted lush new grass, perfect for grazing. Hazel's expanded garden flourished under her care, despite her growing belly making some tasks more challenging. Everett became increasingly protective as Hazel's pregnancy advanced, hiring additional help for the house and insisting she rest during the hottest part of the day. She complied with some of his concerns but continued to be involved in ranch operations, refusing to be sidelined completely. "The baby and I are fine," she would assure him, guiding his hand to feel the strong kicks that punctuated her days and nights. "This little one is as stubborn as both its parents." By July, Hazel's confinement began in earnest. The summer heat was oppressive, making her uncomfortable and irritable. Everett moved their bedroom to the cooler north side of the house and spent evenings reading to her from the books they'd ordered from back east. On the evening of August 12th, as a spectacular sunset painted the sky, Hazel's labor began. Mrs. Rivera took charge, sending Everett and the men from the house with firm instructions not to return until called. Walker rode for the midwife in town, returning with her just as Hazel's pains intensified. Outside, Everett paced the yard like a caged lion, wincing at each cry that escaped through the open windows. Miguel finally convinced him to sit on the porch steps, where the other hands joined him in a silent vigil as night fell. Just after midnight, a new cry pierced the darkness, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Everett was on his feet instantly, but it was another 20 minutes before Mrs. Rivera appeared at the door, her face weary but triumphant. "You have a daughter, Mr. Blackwood," she announced. "Strong and perfect, like her mother." The hands erupted in cheers as Everett, suddenly unsteady on his feet, made his way into the house. In the bedroom, he found Hazel propped against pillows, her face exhausted but radiant as she cradled a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Come meet your daughter," she invited, her voice hoarse from exertion. Everett approached cautiously, almost afraid to believe in this miracle. When Hazel pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny face framed by wispy dark hair, he felt his heart expand with a love so powerful it left him breathless. "She's beautiful," he whispered, perching carefully on the edge of the bed. "Like her mother." "Would you like to hold her?" Hazel asked. With trembling hands, Everett accepted his daughter, marveling at how something so small could feel so significant. The baby's eyes opened briefly blue, as all newborns are, but with a hint of what might become her mother's hazel green. "What shall we call her?" he asked, gently stroking a perfect miniature cheek. "I was thinking Elizabeth after my mother," Hazel suggested. "We could call her Beth." "Elizabeth Blackwood." Everett tried the name, smiling as the baby squirmed in response. "It suits her." As August faded into September, Life at Blackwood Ranch adjusted to accommodate its newest member. Beth proved to be a good-natured baby, her cries generally limited to expressions of hunger or discomfort that were quickly addressed. Even the most hardened ranch hands found excuses to visit the main house, each trying to coax a smile from the infant. 1 year to the day after Everett had proposed, he presented Hazel with a special gift, the deed to her father's original homestead, now legally registered in her name alone. "But why?" she asked, confused. "It's already part of the ranch. Because I want you to have something that's entirely yours," he explained. "Not as my wife or Beth's mother, but as Hazel Winters Blackwood in your own right." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "So I'm no longer sold with the land I was born on." "You never were," Everett said softly. "Not to me. But now there's legal proof for anyone who might question it." Hazel set the deed aside and moved into his arms. "Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me from the very beginning." "How could I not?" he murmured against her hair. "You shine too brightly to be overlooked." As Beth grew from infant to toddler, Blackwood Ranch prospered under the joint stewardship of Everett and Hazel. They expanded their cattle operation, added sheep to utilize different grazing areas, and became known throughout the territory for their progressive ranching methods. In the spring of 1879, with Beth nearing 2 years old and taking wobbly steps around the ranch yard, Hazel discovered she was expecting their second child. This pregnancy was easier than the first, her body remembering the way. On a warm October afternoon, their son James Everett Blackwood entered the world, a sturdy boy with his father's determined jaw and his mother's expressive eyes. Beth, initially uncertain about this newcomer, soon appointed herself his protector and guide, a role she took very seriously. As the family grew, so did the ranch. By 1885, Blackwood Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the territory, employing over 20 men and supporting several families who lived in cabins built on the property. The original house had been expanded twice, with a dedicated office for ranch business and a schoolroom where Hazel taught Beth, James, and the other children who lived nearby. On a crisp autumn day that year, Hazel stood on the porch watching Beth, now 8, help her 6-year-old brother collect fallen leaves for a school project. At 31, Hazel had settled into a confidence and contentment that made her more beautiful than ever. The girl who had once feared being bound to land not of her choosing had become a woman who chose her boundaries and her connections with equal conviction. Everett joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. At 39, his hair showed the first threads of silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened from years of squinting into Montana sunlight. To Hazel, he was more handsome than ever. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was thinking about choices," she replied, leaning into his solid warmth. "About how sometimes what seems like the worst day of your life can lead to everything you never knew you wanted." Everett's arm tightened around her. "The day the marshals came?" She nodded. "If my father hadn't made that terrible bargain, if you hadn't been the one to buy the land, if I hadn't paid twice just to let you choose where to go," he finished with a smile. "Exactly." She turned in his arms to face him. "That choice you gave me, it was the first real freedom I'd ever known. And you chose to stay," he reminded her, his eyes warm with love. "Best choice I ever made," Hazel affirmed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. Their moment was interrupted by Beth's excited call. "Mama, Papa, look what we found." Hand in hand, they descended the porch steps to examine their children's discovery, a bird's nest fallen from a tree, perfectly formed and still intact. "It's like a little home," Beth explained seriously. "Can we keep it for our collection?" "I think that's a fine idea," Everett agreed, ruffling her dark hair. "Homes should be preserved, even small ones." As the children ran off to continue their explorations, Hazel looked around at the ranch that had become her domain, the gardens she'd established, the orchards beginning to bear fruit, the school building where local children gathered to learn. Beyond them stretched the grasslands where cattle grazed, and further still, the mountains that had witnessed her journey from indentured servant to respected rancher's wife. "We've built something remarkable here," she said softly. "We have," Everett agreed, following her gaze. "But the most remarkable thing isn't the land or the buildings or even the ranch's success." He turned to meet her eyes. "It's the family we've created, the love that grows stronger with each passing year." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Hazel felt a profound sense of gratitude. The land that had once represented her bondage had become the foundation of her freedom. The man who had purchased that land had become her partner in all things. And the life they shared with its joys and challenges, its quiet moments and grand adventures, was richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined on that fateful day when a gunshot announced the arrival of the marshals. "I love you, Everett Blackwood," she said simply. "Today and always." "And I love you, Hazel Blackwood," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Through whatever comes next." Together they watched their children play beneath the vast Montana sky, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other not just love, but home, a place where both their hearts could roam free, chosen rather than constrained, treasured rather than owned.